I haven't really bothered to think of this until just now, just how insane it is that history is now a national defense priority
True.
rather than a humanities discourse.
Hmm.
Um, it just tells us a lot about the Trump mindset and how he understands control of the past, control of free thought, I would say more broadly, as a frontier in his cultural and political wars.
Welcome to Research Rabbit Holes. I'm Laura Herges. I'm a PhD student in American Studies, and each episode we go down a different rabbit hole with a researcher who talks to me about their current projects. Down the rabbit hole, Research Rabbit Holes. Today I have a very special guest, my first guest on this new podcast, Dr. Alexander Xan Karn. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you for joining me. Yeah, I'm actually saying good morning because you are an associate professor of history at Colgate University in Madison County, New York, and it's 10 a.m. there, while it's 4 p.m. where I am, which is Heidelberg in Germany. Right.
Yes, that's right. We're right in the middle of New York, somewhat close to the city of Syracuse, but much closer to Canada than we are to New York City.
And Xan, your research interests include, among other things, the politics of history in contemporary societies, the role of historical commissions in conflict mediation and reconciliation, as well as museums and monuments as sites of historical dialogue, which is quite fitting to where we actually met, because we met in July at a conference in Prague that was hosted by the Memory Studies Association. And your presentation at that conference is also our topic today, which is the American Semiquincentennial. Now that's a bit of a tongue twister for me.
That's very good. I'm very impressed with that pronunciation. That's great.
Thank you. So the Semiquincentennial basically means the 250th birthday of the United States. And this will be celebrated next year on the 4th of July, 2026. This is actually the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And funnily enough, the episode about this topic today is recorded on the German national holiday, because today is German Reunification Day. But I did not pick that date on purpose. That's a total coincidence.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a great chance to talk about memories and anniversaries and the construction of identity on particular dates.
Yeah. And I briefly wanted to mention that I knew about the Semiquincentennial before I heard your presentation, because I was in the United States for the first time in my life this year, and I was staying close to Washington, D.C. to do some archival research for my PhD. And during the time, the 250th birthday of the Army happened. And then we had this parade in Washington, D.C. as well, which I did not watch live, but I saw it on the live stream. And then I talked to my mother about this later, and she was like, wait, I saw something else that was kind of similar. And then she sent me a link to an article about the Semiquincentennial. And then I went to Prague briefly afterwards and listened to your presentation. I was like, wait a second, I heard that before. So
I didn't realize that you had been in DC and seen that spectacle, which was, in my mind, something very dark for our country, but for others, I suppose, an occasion of celebration.
It was a bit confusing because, I didn't really know what to expect. And then I saw that live stream. I was like, wow, first of all, it was quite long. It was like a 2-hour parade of just different military tanks and other technologies showing up. And then what really confused me was the crowd's reactions sometimes, because honestly, as an outsider, after a while it got a bit boring, because it was always like the host was always like, okay, this is tank blah 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 from this and that war, and the crowd was always like, woo, and then this just continued over the course of 2 hours, and then at the end this country singer showed up and just sang a couple of songs, and yeah, it was a bit confusing, but also kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I should add. I mean, it was boring. I think even for the president who attended and was shown in televised sequences, maybe dozing off a bit. Um, I mean, it's unusual. I think for Americans, we are not used to seeing troops in the streets of our capital or in any of our major cities. Maybe we will get used to this, or we'll need to become accustomed to it, maybe.
Hopefully not.
I, I hope not. I'll add, though, that on the same day, like parallel to the parade in Washington, there were hundreds throughout the country. There were hundreds of No King's Day
Right.
protests, and so there was a somewhat large crowd in D.C. I think maybe in the tens of thousands who attended Trump's spectacle. There were throughout the country, though, millions who showed up in city squares and in small towns and villages,
Mm.
even with a different kind of memory of the country in mind and with a different message, obviously, to send about our country, our history, where we stand now in relation to our history and values.
Mm. Yeah, so I can imagine that the 250th birthday of the army and the celebration was a big topic in the US that was widely discussed. And I wanted to ask you, is that the case for the semi-quincentennial as well? Like, do people talk about this? Is there like a large discourse about it? Or are most people a bit ignorant about that topic at the moment?
I would say the latter. There is an effort that Trump and the federal government make now to turn the semi-quincentennial into a major kind of memory moment.
Mm-hmm.
But as is often the case, what government wants in DC and what ordinary people are preoccupied with can be very different. And there are not that many people who recognize the importance of the anniversary or what potential importance this summer anniversary might hold. Semi-quincentennial is not a word that most people in this country have heard
Mm-hmm.
or can pronounce. And I think um, I think it's probably the case that the semi-quincentennial, the fact that we're not quite at the beautiful round numbers that we prefer to use for these kinds of memory projects
Mm-hmm.
is a limiting factor. So if this was a tricentennial, it would probably capture the public imagination more than this kind of half measure, this 250th moment.
Mm. We'll have to wait another 50 years for that.
Let's hope.
So how did you actually get interested in the semi-quincentennial?
Well, I'll say just very quickly about my own training and a little bit about my teaching. My background is in European intellectual and cultural history, and it's a strange thing for me to be focused on the U.S., where I've not really been trained to make any real kind of expert analysis. But over the years and in my teaching, I've become more and more interested, as you mentioned earlier, in what you could call the politics of history or the politics of memory. I'm more interested now in public history, how the past is represented for a general public,
Mm-hmm.
than I am in any kind of like deep archival reconstructions of the past. My colleagues in the Colgate History Department, I think, are very generous to continue to recognize me as one of them, because I'm not really doing history at this point. I'm doing what you could call memory studies. But I teach and have taught now for several years a class called The Politics of History. And we have, we look in that class at several things. We have units on history curricula. We have units on monuments and memorials. We look at museums. And at some point, I think maybe 2022, 2023, the semi-quincentennial appeared on my radar. I don't even remember exactly now how it was introduced to me, but somebody said, Oh, you have to look at this website. There's a commission, the America 250 Commission is up and running. They're putting together a commemorative project,
Hmm.
and you might like to see this. It probably would fit well in your course on the politics of history. So about 3 years ago, I started to look at the commission and its work. These were Biden years, and a very different project was underway at the time.
Hmm.
But I could recognize already in 2022, 2023, I could recognize already that there was a need for a kind of critical appraisal of what kind of commemoration was underway, and I could see already the potential for something worse in the next, election cycle.
I see. The question that you asked in your paper and that also some other authors asked in articles that they wrote is, why should we actually care about the semi-quincentennial? And you argue that historical anniversaries like that one are sites of memory reconstruction and moments for negotiation of a group identity. And one of the articles you shared with me was written by Beverly Gage for The Atlantic. And she said that right now the United States are in an identity crisis. And so I wondered, would you say that the US at the moment even has something like a group identity? Or is the country too divided to even find common denominators any longer?
It seems to me there's very little common ground anymore. There doesn't seem to be a civic space or a civic discourse in which a broad swath of Americans feel comfortable talking to each other about our past. And there have been many, who have talked about America's polarization. I don't see it in quite those terms. I don't think it's just, I don't think there are just sort of two camps that are involved here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in any case, no, we're as far away as I think we have ever been in this country from having a shared or consolidated sense of collective identity. On the other hand, I would say this is not entirely new. Um,
Right.
there were conversations like this around the time of the bicentennial, which I was alive for and remember dimly. I was a little boy. But but the United States at that time, early '70s, mid '70s, was mired in a bad economy and coming out of a losing war.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Confidence in government and in public institutions was at record lows, and people were asking questions then like they are asking questions now about who we are. Are we a people? Is this a nation, or are we several hundred million people bounded by space but not by values? Um, so it's quite bad, and I think the trajectory now might be different. Where we are headed and who is in charge, those things are different now. But in some ways, this polarization or this discord, this fragmentation, it's something that we have been dealing with maybe throughout my entire life, and the crisis of identity management, I think, waxes and wanes, but never quite disappears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you already mentioned the A250, which is the name of the commission for the organization of the celebration next year. And in your presentation, you actually showed us some pictures from a video that was on their website. And this video was kind of like a trailer for the semi-quincentennial, I would call it. And it was called Our American Story. And in your paper, you called this video liberal kitsch. So what exactly do you mean with that?
Sure. No, it is crazy to think and to know that our serious historical enterprise, something like the Semi-Quincentennial Commission, feels obliged to create, what Hollywood would create to market its own productions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I think the appearance of this trailer, that's a really interesting word. I think, the appearance of the trailer tells us that public history now models itself after and takes its cues from our entertainment industry.
Oh, all
Um,
right.
and and that's probably not a particularly helpful um, that's probably not a particularly helpful thing in terms of encouraging deep understanding of the past.
Mm-hmm.
If the past becomes more and more of a Hollywood production, I think our chances of understanding it deeply are not improved. But the commission that you mentioned was launched, or the commission was created in 2016 by an act of Congress. It was convened finally in 2018. It was supposed to be a bipartisan enterprise. There was supposed to be an equal number of Democrats and Republicans sitting on the commission and overseeing its initiatives. The video that you mentioned was uploaded to the A250 website at the beginning of 2023. So this
Mm.
was still a Biden administration at the time. It's a crazy video. It's about 2 minutes and 48 seconds long. It's a series of still images, archival images for the most part. I think
Mm-hmm.
I tried to count one by one how many images are introduced in the video in this rapid sequence, and there are almost 120 images shown in less than 3 minutes. There's a narrator, very interesting text, and even the voice of the narrator, I think, is something significant. It's this sort of cowboy voice, this sort of gravelly, rugged individual
Really?
who yeah, who talks to the viewer as if he were the voice of America. He says, in 250 years, I've seen some things. So it's
Mm-hmm.
America talking directly to the viewer. And I've gone through each of the images and tried to sort of sort and categorize what kind of narrative emerges from this really condensed tale of America's past. And it is mostly a collection of what I'll call nation glorifying
Mm-hmm.
images. There are pictures of our beautiful Rocky Mountains and pictures of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. There are iconic images like the Marines who raised a flag over the island of Iwo Jima during the Second World War. So there's a picture of a bald eagle in flight.
Very
Um,
symbolic.
so so yeah, so these are, like, I would say, cliched images in many cases. They are nation glorifying, and I think they are mixed together with a few references to the setbacks that America has faced, the challenges that America has overcome. And I think what interests me most about the video is the way that these references to injustice. For example, there's an image in the video of the Japanese American internment
Mm-hmm.
camps, which FDR authorized after the Pearl Harbor attack. That's a nation critical image, not a nation glorifying image, or I think most people understand it as a critical image. Um, but what references there are to injustice in America are, I think, submerged in a narrative of sort of redemption, inexorable progress. The setbacks that we have faced have been surmounted now,
Mm-hmm.
and what injustice can be located in the American past is firmly in the past. There's no
Mm-hmm.
sense of any ongoingness of injustice, only that we have seen injustice briefly in the past and managed to overcome it.
Mm, I see.
Um, all of this together, I mean, you could describe it different ways. It's a liberal nationalism, which I have grown up seeing for 50 some odd years. But it's also, as I said, I think a kind of kitsch, because the tropes are so tired now and so worn. And I think many Americans are sophisticated enough to sense their hollowness.
Mm-hmm.
But they are there in any case, making a claim to our sort of public historical consciousness.
Mm.
It's bad history. It's really bad history. But unfortunately, the A250 enterprise, the work of this commission, has only, I think, gotten worse
Mm.
since the beginning of 2025.
Mm. And the trailer has since been deleted from the website, right?
That's right. The trailer was removed from the A250 Commission website, as were many of the documents which you could find there previously, like the Commission reports to Congress. It's a federally funded initiative, and so the Commission is required to make annual reports to Congress. And all of its reports prior to 2025, with the inauguration of Donald Trump for a second term, all of those Commission reports are now gone. The video has been taken down, and A250 now looks very, very different. You would not think that that we would have any feeling of nostalgia for this kind of liberal kitsch, but now that it's gone, and something darker is moving to replace it, I would be happy to see that video back.
It was a lesser of two evils, maybe.
First, I think you're right. I think that's exactly it.
Yeah, I've been wondering why this video might have been taken down. And when you talked about it a moment ago, I thought maybe the reason might be these allusions to injustices that have been overcome, even if they were just indirectly referenced. But it kind of stands in a contrast to Donald Trump's view of history, which is basically everything was better in the past. And one of the articles you sent me also said that in his vision, he basically thinks that US history was a tale of triumph until roughly the 60s. And so I thought maybe this stands in such a strong contrast to this A250 video that might be one of the reasons why it was actually taken down.
Yeah, I think that's one major part of it. There is in the Trump historical consciousness, to the extent that Trump has any interest in the past, there is no room for critical appraisals of the past. There is no room in the Trump narrative of America's past for any failures or injustices or mistakes or struggles, unless those can be pinned on, the 1960s generation and the new left, in which case he's happy to talk about the mistakes and errors of the past. So I think that's certainly one part of it, that, it was already a sanitized history, but it's not sanitized enough for our president. The other thing that I think is important is that, although I describe it as liberal kitsch, that Story of America video makes clear that America is and has always been a multicultural democracy. Mm-hmm. The faces of Americans in that video are a collection of many ethnicities, and the faces in the video reflect, what differences exist within American society. There are images of Americans in wheelchairs. There are images of indigenous Americans, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Latinx Americans. It's a multicultural portrait of the country. It's a pluralist democracy that is presented there. And we are moving now, or Trump, I think, is moving now to a kind of ethno-nationalism, in which that kind of difference is undesirable and unacceptable. And so I think, despite the fact that the video was already so superficial in what image of the country it presented, that was, I think, for our president, altogether too much diversity.
Oh, right. Something that actually really surprised me was how long this planning phase has been going on. Because it started in 2016, which means that it will be 10 years until the actual event. So this is a really big thing, apparently. And 4 different presidencies happened during this planning phase. It started during Barack Obama's presidency. Then it continued through the first Trump presidency, through the Biden presidency, and now we have Donald Trump as the president yet again. And you mentioned in your paper that the president has always been the historian in chief. So now with Donald Trump as the historian in chief, what can we actually expect during those celebrations? So what will be remembered next year? And can we imagine this in a similar way as the military parade this year?
I think the military parade is exactly the kind of thing that we can expect to see. My sense is that that the next 7 or 8 months leading up to the Semiquincentennial, the commission, which is now, I should have mentioned, the commission is now playing a kind of second fiddle in the planning process. At the beginning of 2025, just after his inauguration, Trump created a White House task force on the Semiquincentennial. And this task force, which is a MAGA enterprise, unlike the commission, which was meant to be nonpartisan, Trump's task force is a partisan enterprise. He himself is the chair of the task force. J.D. Vance is the vice chair. The new task force has kind of taken control of the planning process, and the A250 commission is now reduced to this kind of secondary role. They continue to send emails to their email subscribers. The website remains online, but in a new and different form. This liberal nationalism that the commission was working to promote is, I think, no longer with us, and this is what I expect to see going forward. There's going to be less and less excavation of the past, and more sort of nullification and silencing of the past. The narrative that the White House task force is steering us toward is increasingly sort of vacuous. As you mentioned, the parade in DC last summer, was a visual spectacle, but there was a kind of monotonous and sort of head scratching quality to it. Like, the tanks are meant to mean something. The military hardware is meant to mean something. It's meant to be a symbol of our strength as a nation. Right. It's meant to refer back to what military victories we have enjoyed. But it's a tenuous connection between what symbols are presented and what history is meant to be symbolized. What I see in the Trump historical narrative is a kind of there's a disturbing sort of emptiness to it. There are lots of signifiers, but it's never clear exactly what is being signified, except for the crudest possible ethno-national suggestions about our greatness, our glory, our destiny, our exceptionalism, and our strength through unity, which is really disturbing to live through.
And although there is no real unity anymore right now.
That's right. It's a fake unity, and the design, the blueprint for unity under Trump is one that can only be executed or completed through a program of kind of political purge. His rhetoric, I'm sure increasingly revolves around the war on internal enemies and the internal war within America, the war that will be necessary to sort who are the true patriots and real Americans from the pretenders and from the enemies.
Against what he calls the deep state?
Well, I mean, not only the deep state. I think what's frightening to me now is the way in which this rhetoric extends well beyond DC into the kind of civilian population. It's no longer just who occupies administrative posts in DC. It's who's on the streets in Los Angeles. It's who are the voters in Chicago? Do we need to go to Portland to root out these un-American internal enemies? So the deep state was a kind of launching pad, but the nullification of difference, of diversity, and the cleansing of history now is a kind of coast to coast project for Trump.
I see. We already talked a bit about this organizing committee called America 250, which organizes the celebration next year. And there seems to be a lot of behind-the-scenes drama. People have quit. There has been infighting in the group. And then also Meta, who had a sponsorship deal that was worth $10 million, pulled out of this. So it seems to be quite messy from the outside. And I think a reason for this is also the funding cuts, right? And I'm not sure if I understood this correctly. So there have been funding cuts to this organization called National Endowment for the Humanities, which is like a federal agency that awards money to a variety of recipients. And the Semiquincentennial would have also used that funding.
Well, that's not the only source of federal funding for the commission, but I would say more generally, I think you're exactly right. The Trump economy, the Trump budget for this country now includes radical cuts to whatever agencies have delved critically into an exploration of the past or any critical presentation of the American present. Anywhere there is critical inquiry, those initiatives are being radically defunded now under the MAGA budget. It's interesting, I think, that the A250 Commission itself has been subject to budget cuts. They were getting on. If you read the reports that the commission had made to Congress in the past, they were getting along with 10 to 20 million a year, starting in 2018 when they first were convened. But they had asked for budget increases in the final years of planning. There was a hope that in 2024, 2025, leading into 2026, that our Congress would appropriate a bigger budget for the commission, something like 100 million in the final 2 years. And none of that money came through in the most recent MAGA budget. This is just this is just another example of the way in which our federal government, this new administration, starves any cultural institution when it does not align itself perfectly to the ethno-national vision that Trump is wedded to.
I just didn't really get if this celebration is so important to the Trump administration that they even created this MAGA task force for it. Why did they even cut the budget of the NEH? Like, is fighting against DEI more important than the celebration?
Well, I didn't give you the second piece of this, actually. So at the same time that these big budget cuts were handed down to A250, to the commission, the task force is housed within our Department of Defense, which is a stunning and almost incomprehensible administrative arrangement.
It's
right?
quite strange,
That any history project should be framed as a national defense initiative already is, I think, telling and disturbing in its own way. But, as things like the NEH, the National Endowment for Humanities, are starved of funds, there is at the same time major new investment in all kinds of so-called national defense initiatives. And so the White House task force is not starved for funds. They have, I think, probably a checkbook that they can write checks from freely. It's not simply that Trump is promoting history without funding it. He's shifting what funding what funding agencies' history is meant to be drawn from.
So who gets the money gets to decide what the celebration is going to look like, basically.
The money always gets to decide.
Right.
But I mean, I haven't really bothered to think of this until just now, just how insane it is that history is now a national defense priority,
True.
rather than a humanities discourse. Um, it just tells us a lot about the Trump mindset and how he understands control of the past, control of free thought, I would say more broadly, as a frontier in his cultural and political wars.
Relating to that, I would like to quote your paper again. So you wrote, with MAGA history, we no longer have only the problem of memory holes. We're also faced with bad actors who choose to remember otherwise in the face of critical history. This is a group I have referred to elsewhere as the memory trolls, and I love that term. And I wanted to ask you, what exactly do you mean when you call these people memory trolls? Is it somehow related to this concept that was somehow popularized by the Trump administration of alternative facts?
It's related to alternative facts. It is this sort of historical elaboration of the new Trump epistemology in which alternative facts are allowed to proliferate, whether or not they have any kind of empirical substance to them. Memory trolls, that's a term that I came up with a couple years ago. I was asked to review, for memory studies, I was asked to review this giant edited collection on memory activism, the work that was edited by Jenny Wustenberg and Yifat Gutman.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, very, very nice collection of essays on memory activism. And I think what's especially good about that book is the insistence of the editors on presenting memory activism as a double-edged sword, so to speak, as an enterprise that can be pursued by progressives when progressives are out of power, but also by the radical right, not only when they are out of power, but even when they are in power. I think for me, memory trolls also probably relates to some of the work that Charles Meyer has done on history and counterhistory. Counterhistory, he says, refers to the derivative histories that are not meant to deepen our understanding of the past, but are meant to refute and nullify what uncomfortable truths historical scholarship has presented us with. And so that's how I see the trolls, and that's how I see our troll in chief. He doesn't actually care about the past. He's not especially interested in deepening his own or anyone's understanding of the past. He only uses the past as a kind of cudgel to nullify wherever he can the suggestion that our past demands a critical appraisal and a critical approach.
And I think that's also the reason why many argue that the political left should try and reclaim this celebration of the semi-quincentennial to encourage a more critical engagement with America's past, right?
We'll do what we can in what space we have left. I think it would be very encouraging from my perspective to see not the abandonment of the commemoration. It would be easy to sort of walk away in disgust. But I think, as you said, I think it would be highly encouraging. I think if we were to see memory activism from the left demanding a voice in this discourse and a seat at this table, and insisting on its right to contribute meaningfully to this commemorative enterprise. It's interesting to me that in 1976, at the time of our bicentennial, There were some really interesting examples of memory activism, grassroots organizations promoting their own sort of alternative histories of the country at the moment of the bicentennial. Because that bicentennial celebration, like the liberal kitsch we were talking about, was a kind of sanitized view of our country's story. But there were citizens groups, grassroots groups. There were scholars who launched their own sort of activist commissions, their own sort of people's commissions, in an attempt to sort of ensure that the discourse would be one of multiple perspectives and voices. And I think, in 2025, 2026, I think that's probably exactly what's required of us now, to ensure that the ethno-national history that Trump will sell in the next 8 months isn't allowed to exist in a vacuum, but is opposed by and brought up to a bar of critical judgment.
And one of the main reasons why the political left is turning away and, as you call it, walking away from this instead of critically engaging with it is the rejection of traditional patriotism. In my mind, when I read all those papers you sent me, I kind of tried to compare it a bit with Germany, because as I said, today is the German national holiday. And to be very honest, people just don't care that much about it. I mean, it's nice that we have a holiday. Nobody has to go to work today. And I feel like, yes, people are grateful for the reunification, which happened 35 years ago, but it's not at all comparable to the 4th of July in the United States. And I wondered if this might also be because of American exceptionalism. So this notion of the US being sort of special and in a way better than other countries, with patriotism being something like a civil religion. And I wondered, what would non-traditional patriotism actually look like some kind of patriotism that could be embraced by the political left again?
Yeah, that's a really interesting comparison. If the German sort of bratwurst and beer consortium could get behind Reunification Day, that would be already a big step to
Sure.
make it a day to eat and drink like the 4th of July is for many people.
That'd be nice.
No, but I think, to be serious, I think that you're right. In the way that Germans after World War II, navigated a difficult set of considerations on their way to a new kind of patriotism. The reluctance, the understandable reluctance to embrace the flag or any kind of martial tradition.
Right.
I think that's what the American left that's where the American left has been living since the 1968 moment. And our left has a long tradition now, 50 plus year tradition, or track record of opposing these kinds of patriotic initiatives. But I think right now, if we were to remain in that purely critical mode, if we were to say about all forms of patriotism that this can only lead us somewhere dangerous, we would be ceding this arena to the MAGA clique and giving them carte blanche to tell ordinary people what is and what is not patriotic. And so our left will have to think about how to do patriotism in a careful and discerning, but also pragmatic way, understanding that at the end of the day, many people do want a feeling of collective belonging. Collective identity is important to many people, whether or not we think these large collectivities are good or bad for the world. People want that sense of belonging. And so we will have to, on the left, think about how to give people a sense of belonging, and a belonging to what? Can people identify deeply with a country whose history is so imperfect? Can you love your country and be critical of it at the same time? All of that, I guess, remains to be seen.
This is also something that has been debated in Germany because I feel like my country is kind of on the other extreme of the scale because here, like literally the only occasion when we ever wave German flags is when there is a football match or a soccer match. And yeah, I feel like I'm proud to be German. It's just not something you really say here. Also because of our history, obviously. But it's always super interesting for me to like see other perspectives on that. Definitely.
Yeah, and athletics and the football pitch in particular have always been a place for liberals to do patriotism safely. At the beginning of this year, our national hockey team was facing off against Canada in a tournament called the Four Nations Cup, and this was a big television spectacle for people who enjoy or care about hockey, as I do. It was something I wanted to watch for sure. Um, but I found it hard to root for the American side in this case. And that's as you said, that's problematic. We can't give the MAGA clique the luxury of deploying their patriotism without some kind of counter proposal.
I agree. There is not just black and white in this. There is always like stages of gray.
Yeah. It's interesting to think also generationally what this will mean for Germans and Americans going forward. The students that I'm teaching, I teach only undergraduates, so these are, 18, 19, 20-year-old students. They are sort of alert to what problems our country is having, and they know something about the genealogy, the historical sources of these problems. But they are not especially engaged in the politics today. Many of my students voted for the first time in the 2024 election, and the outcome of that election they found to be highly discouraging. And my fear is that they will sort of withdraw from the game going forward and sit themselves on the sidelines instead of pushing in the way that we will really need.
Something that I find super interesting about this concept of American patriotism being like a civil religion is the importance of certain places and objects. Because a couple of years ago, for example, one of my professors at the uni here showed us pictures of Plymouth Rock, which is like the place where apparently the Pilgrims first landed in America. And it's literally just a rock. And I was so confused by that. And then also when I went to the US for the first time this year, one of the cities I visited was Philadelphia. And there you have the Liberty Bell. And it has like this whole Liberty Bell Center. And apparently people are really fascinated by this. And I was like, this is just a bell. And it's just hard to understand from like a non-American perspective. But I find it super fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, Freud has all of this stuff to say about fetish and fetish objects and the way in which psychic energies get invested in very small and almost arbitrary objects. That's worth thinking about. Public history is always, I would say, a kind of condensing enterprise. You're always trying to squeeze a very complicated story into a tidy, convenient package. It's always a sanitizing operation. There's always going to be a great deal that is left out, voices that are excluded, injustices that are papered over. And, somehow like the smaller the object, especially like these material objects you're describing, the bell, the rock, the smaller the object, the sort of the easier they lend themselves to these public history enterprises, because you can only get so much in the space of the bell or the rock. And so that's the perfect place to do public history, because it has to be tidy, it has to be condensed, it has to be simplistic, and that is what people want and respond to, but that doesn't, I think, serve a country well ultimately if we live only with these fetishized histories.
So with younger people becoming a bit more critical and a bit more maybe engaging with also the critical parts of history, do you think these objects and places will lose importance in the next couple of decades?
I'm hesitant to predict what might or could happen. And really, I can say honestly, I just don't know. I'm optimistic at certain times because I see in the students that I work with, there's a much deeper knowledge of and appreciation for what critical history exists and is available. My students have almost all been introduced to the Japanese American internment camps that we were talking about. Almost all of them know that story before I meet them. They were given access to that history during in their high school curriculum. When I was their age, that was still an invisible history and a forgotten history. And so I see examples of like the emergence of a critical framework. These are people who can, I think, look at the past, honestly see the warts, but they also, I think, know that going forward, the question of who is America, that's up to them. That'll be up to them. So I'm optimistic on the one hand that these well-educated young people with critical faculties are going to be the ones negotiating these questions. But also I know that, we always do our history under particular conditions. And I think going forward, the conditions in which we will be able to explore our history are going to be more and more constrained. It's I don't want to overstate this, but in the United States, it gets more and more risky and dangerous to do this kind of critical enterprise. People right now lose their jobs for that, and that's already bad. It could, of course, get worse than this.
It's terrible.
Yeah, so I don't know what to say. I'm hopeful when I talk with my students, when I look at what perspectives they bring to the table, and I'm concerned and skeptical when I think about the overall political framework that's taking shape now.
Mm-hmm. We already briefly talked about the concept of American exceptionalism, and I'm actually going to teach a course about American cultural studies very soon. It starts in 10 days exactly, and so I'm also going to talk a bit about American exceptionalism with my students. So in preparation for that, I looked at some recent polls, and according to one from last year, only 36% of Democrats are very proud to be American, but 92% of Republicans who participated at that poll. And so this kind of corresponds to what we said at the beginning of the interview, that the country is more politically divided than ever before. And just generally, I sometimes ask myself, how did this happen? Because although Donald Trump certainly plays a role there, I'm sure that he can't be the only reason for that. And sometimes I wonder, might this also be the aftermath of the pandemic? Did this increase maybe the divide that already existed before? What do you think of that?
I don't know if it's the pandemic per se, but I would think certainly that our mediated existence, our information ecosphere, what's happened in the world of sort of technology and online existence. I think there's been a real sort of corrosion of not only of national identity, but of facts and knowledge and vetted information. I think it may not be the pandemic per se that is working to splinter and fragment us in this way, but I think that the information ecosystem in which we're living is doing that in a concerning way. I'll just say though that the poll that you mentioned, it's not it's not that it's unreal or insignificant. It's really important and also disturbing to know that about our country, this divide that you're pointing toward. But there's other public polling that tells a slightly different picture. There's a very, very good podcast called Democracy Americana, which a German, Thomas Zimmer, has been working on for the past several years. And in a recent episode of his podcast, he talked about public opinion polling. I won't remember all of the details right now, but public opinion polling in the U.S. That presents a different picture. There was a question in one public poll recently conducted about the teaching of history, and there was broad agreement in the respondents to this poll about the importance of teaching the history, both its good and bad parts. Mm-hmm. And so, when asked, should we teach history honestly? Should we address both the good and the bad together? Like, more than 85% of Americans agreed to that principle and that sentiment. So, on the one hand, there is, I hope there is this possibility that what we want from the past, what we want the past to do for us, the way in which we will use the past. There's broad agreement about that, but this cultural rift that you're describing is a real thing too. So I could point to one poll and feel optimistic. I could point to another poll like the one you pointed to and feel pessimistic. And we just have to see. This is everything to me remains up for grabs right now.
And you already talked a bit about younger people being more critically engaging with history. And sometimes I wonder if a reason for this might also be social media, because it's true that social media sometimes plays a negative role also with dividing society politically. And also in Germany, like the right-wing party in Germany, AfD, has more views on their videos than all of the other parties combined, which is terrible. But on the other hand, sometimes I see videos on TikTok that are also like self-critical, not just from American creators, but also because, for example, I saw one recently that talked about somebody having to call an ambulance and then paying like $10,000 for it. And then sometimes I'm thinking, if young people see these videos, maybe it helps them to like critically reflect on their own country and not just blindly accepting things like Trump saying, oh, this is the best country in the world and like we couldn't do any better,
Yeah. What I have seen, and in conversations I have with students, I'm buoyed by like what savvy consumers of media my students have become. They understand almost instinctively that all the media they consume comes from a particular perspective,
right?
And they aren't surprised to know that money and power behind the scenes determine what truths are presented and how truth is packaged. So they're critical and they are savvy consumers of media, including like how history is delivered to them through media. On the other hand, I see sometimes a strange and somewhat concerning conclusion that the students make, recognizing that like the past is that the history is political. They sometimes decide finally that everything is more or less equivalent. Everything is only a matter of perspective, and there's no way of kind of mediating or adjudicating where two sort of rival perspectives exist alongside one another. Mm-hmm. We have in the United States, we have had recently like this big 1619 project that the New York Times helped to launch 5 or 6 years ago, a kind of reframing of America's past. Instead of starting with the Declaration of Independence, 1619 refers to the arrival of the first enslaved people. Mm-hmm. And so it was a new kind of origin story of our country. We ought to think first about 1619 before we think about Philadelphia and the Declaration of
I
Independence.
see.
And then there was a counter history to that. During the first Trump administration, he launched something called the 1776 Commission, which was assembled to promote what he called patriotic history.
Mm-hmm.
So you had a very high profile critical history, and then a very high profile patriotic history. And the students, I worry, understand these things as equivalent. And so I try to talk with them about historical methodology. I try to talk to them about who is producing historical knowledge, by what means. And I talk to them about sort of what they imagine now is that all history is equally partisan. But I try to talk with them about what is vetted knowledge, what is unvetted knowledge. I try to talk with them about historical inquiry that seeks to enrich our understanding of the past versus inquiry that exists to nullify
Mm-hmm.
proposals about the past. Are you adding to the story, or are you trying to erase bits of the story that you're uncomfortable with? And I hope that these kinds of differences, these sort of like, what the difference between what I understand as a kind of liberal predisposition and illiberal, on the other hand, I hope that these differences will resonate with students at some point soon.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Coming back to the semi-quincentennial, some of the articles you shared with me talked about earlier anniversaries. And in 1926, that was the 150th birthday of the US, there was apparently a special Ku Klux Klan Day, and that is absolutely insane from today's perspective. Like, I was so shocked when I read about this. And then you already mentioned the anniversary in 1976, which was after the Vietnam War and after Watergate. And so this was not uncontroversial either. And so I was wondering, are people maybe too worried about next year? Like, is the semi-quincentennial, or is like the anniversary in general, not something that has always been kind of controversial? And are we making too big of a deal about this, maybe?
Well, you're right that that history has always been contested. At different moments along the way, the conditions under which history was being produced, the conditions under which historical knowledge were being produced were different. In 1926, some people had a voice and many others didn't. In 1976, many of those who had not had a voice previously were starting to have a voice. We had a new left that was changing the way our public understood the past. So the conditions under which historical knowledge are produced are always changing,
Mm-hmm.
even though you're right that history is always contested. I happen to think that the current conditions are some of the most worrisome that the country has had to confront. We have never had in the Oval Office a person who was so far from the kind of liberal mainstream, not liberal in the sense of the Democratic Party, but liberal in the sense of the overall tradition of free thought and critical inquiry. We've never had somebody in the Oval Office so far from that framework. And under these conditions, I think truly bad things can happen. The public poll that you pointed to, the patriotic index and the disparity between our Democrats and our Republicans right now, those are also new conditions for this country.
Right.
And so I think, the stakes of these historical initiatives are increased where these kinds of conditions exist. Every president, every historian in chief hopes that that history can be a glue that holds us together, that consolidates the nation. The presidents of the past have always looked to history as a kind of resource for consolidation until now. We have a president who doesn't see the past in these terms at all.
Right.
And so I don't know what to expect, but I don't think we're only living through what we've always lived through. We always have contested history, but we have very new conditions.
It's going to be interesting to see how the celebration turns out next year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
We don't know. Anything could happen.
right. To sort of conclude the interview, I wanted to ask one like a bit out of the box question, because when I read about the semi-quincentennial and like patriotism and all these things were going through my mind, I somehow had to think of a musical that I really like, Hamilton, which I've seen multiple times, not live on Broadway, but like on Disney Plus. And I read at some point, I think on Reddit or somewhere, somebody wrote that the making of this musical, the production of this musical was only possible during the optimistic Obama years, and that this was sort of positively connotated patriotism that would not be possible today. And I wanted to ask your opinion on that. Is that true? Like, if Hamilton was produced today, would it be a MAGA musical?
I don't. It's funny that you mentioned Hamilton. That's my overwhelming memory of the pandemic, is watching Hamilton over and over on Disney Plus with my children. But I don't know enough about the sort of politics of Broadway to know like what can be produced there and who calls the shots. I really don't know if that's a cultural space that's been overwhelmed by the MAGA mentality. But I do know that that other cultural spaces where Hamilton-like narratives have been allowed to exist, that those are being rapidly, those are under attack, and those are being pressured and constrained and bullied in ways we haven't seen before. The Smithsonian National Museum of American History has moved, I think, toward kind of Hamiltonian history, Hamilton in the sense of the musical. But now the Smithsonian, operates under new conditions, and they're being asked to sanitize and rewrite the museum narrative. And they do it under the threat of defunding, right? People will lose their budgets or their jobs if they don't toe the line. So what you can do on Broadway today, I'm not exactly sure, but it can't be good that things that are acceptable on Broadway are no longer acceptable in the Smithsonian.
Mm-hmm. Xan, I wanted to ask you about your next projects. Like, is there anything you want to share? Any specific paper or book or something similar you're working on? Anything memory studies related or not?
Sure. So this America 250 project, yeah, I'm working on an article now that hopefully I'll get into peer review before the Semiquincentennial.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I'd like to see this out somewhere in the spring. And then I'll move on to a bigger project about memory trolls, which we talked about earlier. Maybe a book project is there, or maybe another paper. But I want to think about what other trolls are participating and shaping the discourse now besides our president.
Sounds exciting. And if people want to know more about your work and your projects, do you have any website or any social media accounts that you want to share where people can follow your projects?
Sure, thank you. I have a personal website, zankarn.net, XANKARN.net. And I do Mastodon, if you know Mastodon.
It's the Twitter alternative, right?
The Twitter alternative, the federated, non-algorithmic, non-corporate alternative to Twitter. I'm on Mastodon at Karn at mastodon.online.
Okay, great. Then again, thank you so much for this super interesting interview. I learned a lot, and I'm interested and also a bit scared about how next year's celebration of the Semiquincentennial is going to look like.
I feel precisely the same way, interested and scared. I don't know that there is another way of feeling about it, but that's certainly accurate for me.
Yeah, hopefully everything will turn out better than we imagine it right now.
Let's hope.
Okay, thank you so much for being my first guest.
Thank you very much. No, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Research Rabbit Holes. If you want to make sure that you don't miss out on any rabbit hole in the future, make sure to follow me. Down the rabbit hole, Research Rabbit Holes.